Hi, everyone. Welcome. We are going to wait for 2 more minutes just so that way everyone can log in and join us. But in the meanwhile, if you like, go ahead and use the chat function. If you like to know who you are or what organization you're from or what state you're zooming in from, we always love to see the great diversity of folks who are interested in our webinars. So thank you very much. Love that we have some familiar faces on board as well as new friends. Oh, wonderful. Oh, all the way from Alaska too, and New Mexico. Well, wonderful. I think we have a good amount of folks here, and so we'll go ahead and get started. Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you all, everyone for joining us today. Before we get started, we just want to provide a quick note that this webinar is being recorded so we could share it with folks who couldn't join us live. I'm Christine Chen, Executive Director and founder of Asian and Pacific Islander American Vote. We're the leading national organization focused on building political power by increasing API voter participation and civic life. We essentially do this by working with local API community partners as well as student organizations in over 29 states. Today, I'm really excited to share new insights from our latest national survey of AAPI voters. The survey was conducted in November 2025 and includes responses from more than 1,000 registered API voters across multiple languages, including Chinese, Korean, and Vietnamese, to reflect the diversity of our communities. Data like this is critical because APAT voters have historically been overlooked or underrepresented in national polling and political narratives, despite being one of the fastest growing electorates in the country. The survey gives us a clear data-driven picture of what APAT voters are experiencing right now, the pressures that they're facing, issues that matter the most, and what is driving engagement as we head into the midterm election cycle. At the end of the presentation, you'll hear from our partners on the ground who are experiencing these issues firsthand and how they're turning these insights into meaningful action in our communities. Now I'm going to hand it over to Carrie Pugh, President and CEO of 8821 Strategies, and Seiji Carpenter, Vice President of David Binder Research, who will walk us through the findings.
Okay, I think I'm just teeing Seiji up. Hi, everyone.
Thanks, Carrie. And thanks very much, everyone, for joining. I am going to walk through the data here. I will try and move at a pretty good clip. I'll be kind of talking through the numbers, and then I will lean on Carrie to help us to kind of put it in a little bit of real life context. So as Christine mentioned, just over 1,000 registered voters nationwide. This was done using the Amplify API panel from NORC. And we did have the opportunity to offer this in 4 languages, which means that we were able to reach some of the kind of more language isolated AAPI voters. Not all, but certainly more than a lot of traditional polling does. You can see the demographics there at the bottom. The things that I would kind of call out is that Majority of the voters here were born outside the US, and more than 80% had at least one parent born outside the US. So we are kind of representing the kind of first, second generation population of AAPI voters. Only 40% of these voters said they speak English predominantly at home. So I'm going to kind of talk through a few different issues: economy, healthcare, safety, immigration, but starting with the economy, and this is the lens for everything. The first question here: which of the following statements best describes your current economic situation? We gave them a bunch of choices. They could choose one or two. The kind of first option here, financially stable, able to plan long term, is the most secure option. It was chosen by more than any of the other options, but it was only 36% who felt that they were secure enough to be able to say, yeah, I'm financially stable. I can plan long term a little bit. Another 31% who said managing okay. And then you can see the proportions who are saying getting by, but can't really save. Emergency could bankrupt me. I've given up on my bigger dreams. I'm stuck in a gig economy without benefits. Working full time, can't afford basic needs. So looking at that blue bar is kind of the only kind of truly financially stable population. You can see that if you look at it by income, it is the case that higher income folks, just over half, say that they're stable. But for the rest of the AAPI voting population, the number who feel that they're stable is a third or even less. And the proportion who's struggling, you can see kind of up to 75% for the lowest income API folks. So worth just kind of putting in some context. Obviously, there's a lot of kind of, racial stereotypes about the economic position of API voters. But here, even looking at kind of aggregated APIs across ethnicity, there's just a lot of nuance and a lot of folks who are struggling, who are not feeling secure. And that is why when we ask folks which of the following issues matter most when deciding who to vote for, the number one option, the number one response, far and away, cost of living and economic security. So when folks are thinking about how to vote, who to vote for, what matters to them, it is cost of living far and away that dominates. And this is why we say the economy is the lens for everything, because this just overwhelms any of the other issues. You can see that there is kind of a second tier there with democracy and healthcare, both having just under 30%, saying that it's kind of a top tier issue for them to consider. But across ethnicity, across age group, the majority say cost of living is far and away the most important to me. The third there, you can see kind of safety, gun violence, housing affordability, abortion, immigration, climate change, all in the kind of, 8 to 18%. Gets some mention, has a constituency, but it is cost of living that truly dominates across issues here. Just a couple more slides on the economy. We wanted to kind of get a sense of who they blame for rising costs or what they blame. And so we asked about a number of things, and, all of these kind of get high marks. So, this is an agreement scale. The blue bar there is the strongly agree. So all of these kind of, 2/3 are saying agree that it is tariffs, that it's government spending, that it's corporate price gouging, that it's inflation, or just that it's a combination of factors. So there's kind of enough blame to go around. But I do think it's worth noting that the number one issue here, especially when you look by strongly agree, is tariffs. Tariffs on imported goods act as a tax on consumers, making everything more expensive. And this is not something that we've seen kind of as prevalent with other parts of the electorate, so it's kind of worth noting how much that pops here. And if you look at kind of across ethnicities, the percent who agree overall are between 85%, 90, 93%. So it's kind of across ethnicity that folks are kind of pointing the finger at tariffs. And this number, 87% agreeing, this is the highest number that we got in the poll overall. It does show up in one other place, which you'll see momentarily, but just kind of to give some context, this is the place of the greatest consensus, is tariffs are driving up costs, and costs is my most important issue. We also then kind of, here we asked about why costs are going up, but then we wanted to do a little bit more of a dive into tariffs. So we asked a number of questions about tariffs, and you can see kind of looking at the strongly agrees, there's strong agreement with 3 of the statements and really not very strong agreement with 2 of them. And the difference here is these 2 are kind of the administration's position. So tariffs help protect American jobs. Tariffs are necessary to compete with countries like China. And there's just not a lot of sympathy for those positions. On the other hand, tariffs make everything more expensive. Again, we see 87%. Tariffs are just another tax on working families, 80%, and small businesses are being crushed by tariffs, 72%. And you can see here. So yeah, so not a lot of sympathy for the administration's position here. We wanted to kind of ask about what folks are observing on the ground, kind of in business districts. What do you see? And what you see here at the bottom is only a quarter of folks are saying, oh, things are fine. 21%, I haven't noticed significant changes. 4% say neighborhoods remain vibrant and successful. But everybody else is saying, oh, I see restaurants going out of business. Other family businesses that have served communities for generation are shutting down. Import businesses are closing. So 3/4 of folks do see some of these real harms in their day-to-day lives, including the majority who are saying, oh yeah, the restaurants and small businesses are struggling. I see them struggling. So, it is often the case that talking about the economy can seem very abstract, but here we have kind of very personal experiences that folks are having.
Are you going to the next slide? Yeah, I just want to point out just a couple of things. Of course, right, like it's not surprising that Asian American voters are naming the economy as the #1 concern, but just want to point out a couple other things that when they place blame on what is actually driving the cost of living concerns, by and large, it is, as Seiji pointed out, squarely tariffs. But there is also another nuance here, and it's a unique entry and organizing point for when we do our work, right? So tariffs hit both the kitchen table and the cultural pipeline, the restaurants, the import business, ethnic communities, our ethnic business districts, right? Chinatown, K-Town, Little India. We've heard so much about it anecdotally as we've been engaging and having, and getting feedback. But what we're really seeing very clearly is it's also now showing up in the data that these communities are lines back to cultures, to traditions, to celebrations. And so when they close, right, that is something more than just a business is closing. So it's just another entry point as we're talking about the economy to understand, and as we're putting information out and we're organizing, that tariffs are the #1 driver of concern, and that we have another organizing point around what we're seeing show up in our communities. Say, I'll let you move it back to healthcare.
Thanks very much. So in healthcare, we see kind of a similar dynamic. The subheading here, family crisis, not policy abstraction, which is just that this is not just a macro issue. We are seeing people's experiences really reflecting what we know to be the case at the policy level. So we asked this question about kind of people's own experience, and you can see that the kind of top option chosen, my insurance adequately covers my healthcare needs. On one hand, that is encouraging that it's the top option compared to some of these others that are medical emergencies could wipe out everything I've saved. I've skipped or delayed doctor visits. I pay insurance premiums but can't afford my deductibles, etc. But it's also the case that only 54% are saying, yeah, my insurance is adequate. My insurance covers what I need. And if you look at that by age, it's even a little bit more depressing because that's largely being driven by folks on Medicare. It's this 65% older folks who are saying, oh yeah, my insurance covers what I need, as well as some younger folks who are likely on their parents' insurance. So you can see that when you look at kind of middle-aged, kind of real working families, that it's actually at or below 50% who are saying that their insurance is adequate. And again, when you look at it by income, it compounds that even further. The folks who are kind of lower income, it's closer to 1/3 who feel that their health insurance is adequate. So then looking at kind of healthcare costs overall, again, you see kind of this dynamic where the kind of top attitude here has nearly consensus agreement, 86% here kind of agreeing. Those three numbers that we've had so far are kind of the top three in the poll. Insurance companies and drug companies are making billions while families go bankrupt from medical bills. It used to be that this was kind of like a lefty attitude to blame the corporations and say people are struggling. Here you can see that it's pretty pervasive. This is kind of the diagnosis of the healthcare costs today. Also, folks are saying 70% the system is broken, there's no simple solution. And there is a constituency who are saying that costs are high because of government regulation and bureaucracy. But what folks are not saying, this bottom out option down here, healthcare costs are reasonable given the quality of care available. Only 11% agree with that, 5% strongly. So you can get a sense of kind of how AAPI voters are thinking about healthcare costs overall. They are blaming the corporations big time. They're frustrated by the lack of solutions, and they do not feel that the costs are reasonable or affordable. We then asked kind of some questions about the proposed changes to healthcare and Medicaid, and you can see the kind of top option here, the one that the most folks selected. The cuts will affect long-term healthcare for elderly parents, children's healthcare, and people with disabilities. And one thing that we consistently see with healthcare is that everybody's pain points are a little bit different. But what we're seeing is that when you kind of look at parents combined with children, combined with people with disabilities, that it is kind of the plurality of folks saying like, oh yeah, that is something that I am really worried about. And that is true kind of across ethnic group and demographic group. The other kind of the second option here, cutting waste and fraud really means cutting healthcare coverage for millions of families. So kind of another criticism that is really resonating with AAPI voters here. Down here, Medicaid cuts are being used to pay for tax cuts for the wealthy. This is something we heard a lot kind of from critics of the administration's proposals, and it doesn't resonate as much with kind of these points up above about kind of the impact on folks' actual care. But it does resonate more with the administration's defense, which is healthcare reforms are needed to give people more choice and freedom, and cutting Medicaid waste and fraud is necessary to control costs. So these do have a constituency, 22, 23% choosing those options, but there's many more folks who are worried about the impact of the cuts.
Yeah, just a couple of things to point out, right? This is the second, like the top two issues among API voters, which is the same thing that we saw largely in 2024 with a number of the surveys. But what I want to point out when we take this data and our findings in the survey and we implement is that this ought not to be a fight really about Medicaid and Medicare, right? I mean, that's what you're going to hear if you're not already hearing in political ads. They're going to litigate the ACA and Obamacare and Medicaid and Medicare, and that cannot be our frame and the way, and we should be engaging on this issue, which by the way, is also an economic concern. The way to engage is that letter, right? The grandmother or the parent who's on a fixed income who just got the rate notice, which happens, by the way, in the fall, that her rates are increasing, which are already unaffordable, right? The auntie who just got diagnosed with cancer and got that letter that because of the changes in policy won't have her healthcare coverage anymore. As Seiji said, 38% say the cuts will hurt elderly parents and children, and that number does not begin to capture one, the way this issue is going to be litigated throughout the election cycle, and two, really the pain that is coming. So I just wanted to weigh in and say, like, this is an area to weigh in, but let's not present it as a policy debate. Let's really move this to putting the human and the public frame or the public face on it that we know is so compelling in our community as we work to connect those dots and what we're seeing here and what do we do with the information.
Thanks very much, Carrie. I wanted to ask a bit about safety, and we know that this has been kind of both a real and manufactured issue in API communities. So wanted to dive in a little bit to get a sense of what folks' actual concerns are and where they're at. And the First thing that we see that just kind of really jumps out is just the degree to which concern is focused on gun violence. So you can see here we asked a number of different kind of safety concerns and how worried people are, and asked folks to rank them. And you can see kind of if you look at the top concern, it's gun violence and mass shootings for almost half of AAPI voters, and nothing else is close to that. Fentanyl's at 19%, hate crimes at 12%. So it's really kind of a big drop off after gun violence. You can kind of see here when you look at kind of the subgroups, it really is kind of three tiers of concern. It is gun violence number one, fentanyl, hate crimes, and violent crimes against vulnerable people like seniors number two, and then kind of the more ambient general sense of disorder, property crime, retail crime is just not a big concern. And this is different both from, I think, kind of how the media covered this in the past, but I think also from where some folks were. I think there was kind of more of a general sense of unease in, coming out of COVID 2021, 2022. And so I think we have kind of shifted a little bit in how folks, in particular API voters, are thinking about crime. We asked a number of questions about kind of safety in the community, and 68% said, my community feels generally safe, that I feel safe where I am. So to the degree that there are concerns, it is a little bit more theoretical. So we do see the kind of gun violence is struck too close to home and mass shootings or daily crime is at 59%, and small businesses are robbed repeatedly without consequence is at 55%. So there is this kind of contradiction in thinking of folks saying, I generally feel safe. Also, I'm freaked out about gun violence, and I am worried about some of these small businesses being robbed. We don't see kind of as high numbers for kids feeling unsafe or seniors feeling unsafe or for kind of lack of response to crime. But mostly folks are feeling safe in their own communities. We asked about kind of what should we do? And what we see pretty clearly here is a both and. So the number one option is we need comprehensive solutions, both accountability for criminals and investment and prevention. And then number two and three are that accountability and that investment and in prevention. And those are kind of it's not the case that folks are saying, oh, we don't need to address the root causes. We just need to lock everybody up. They're saying we need to make sure that there is some accountability, that there are real consequences, but also we need to be doing things to address poverty and addiction that can lead to crime. Carrie?
Yeah, I just want to point, when we talk about the big picture, as you just saw in the data, about all of the different drivers and the issues that are talked about around crime and public safety, gun violence ranks as high and continues. I mean, we've seen the same data in polls for the last 4 or so years. Gun violence ranks as high for a reason. Asian Americans continue, by and large, to not say that their neighborhoods are dangerous. They're saying that they're worried that they will be targeted. It's personal because of hate, because of violent racist attacks, because of the rhetoric. It's personal and it's palpable. Also, when we go into focus groups for the last few cycles and we ask the same question, while there are nuances, and Seiji's got some of them here, among different ethnicities, this issue nonstop or full stop is an issue that is personal across the board. And everybody has a personal story about themselves, their mother, their grandmother, their parent. So again, when we look at how we present this issue or the other issues that are there's going to be a lot of money spent on a lot of political ads and a lot of mailers from all different sides and stripes and interest groups. This is an issue that resonates and it's personal. And I think this is really a nuanced way in which we approach it.
Another issue that we see being kind of deeply personal, more than political, is immigration. And we wanted to kind of start with federal immigration enforcement and asked and gave kind of a number of different options. You can see the kind of far and away the top option here. Sending National Guard and ICE to immigrant communities is a waste of taxpayer dollars. Half of folks kind of chose that option. You can see it is kind of pervasive across subgroups, especially for younger folks, especially for lower income folks. The administration's position, strong immigration enforcement is necessary for public safety. These operations make communities safer. Kind of at the bottom of the list here, 22%, 13%. This is not an area where there's a lot of sympathy in AAPI communities for the administration's position. The other kind of option, these operations don't address the actual violence that threaten our communities. Federal overreach ignores what local communities need, and these resources should be spent on community policing. All have kind of more support than we need this strong enforcement. Then when we asked about kind of the more recent immigration enforcement, we again kind of get these critical attitudes. Again, here's kind of the administration's position, 15%, 12%, just not a lot of support. The kind of top options chosen, enforcement should focus on violent criminals, not workers here legally or families. And then the second one here really surprised me. Mass workplace raids targeting legal workers, like 400 Korean workers in Georgia, feel like racial targeting of Asian communities. That was kind of the second option chosen. 37% kind of called out the racism. Not surprisingly, including 51% of Koreans. So for Koreans, as well as for younger folks, that this was actually the top option chosen. And it's just, we often don't see in voter research kind of that calling out racism is always effective, even when people kind of like agree with it. When you kind of like specifically point fingers at it, it's often kind of just does not resonate as much. But here you can see that pointing the finger really does connect with folks. This is what people are seeing and how they are feeling, and I think that it is. I think it's noteworthy that this has kind of really shifted in terms of what folks are willing to say. Just kind of a little more context. Carrie, I don't know, did you want to kind of give the context on the Hyundai LG plant?
Sure. And I've seen some of the messages in the chat, and I agree, right? This survey was late November, so we've gone obviously through, I think by that time, spring and summer in Los Angeles, Chicago, but Minnesota had not happened. So I imagine these numbers would evolve. But this is what I do think that the data would still say similarly. An important takeaway, I think, and what we're seeing here is that Asian American voters are clearly watching what enforcement looks like. You'll see in the next couple of slides here some partisan affiliation data. And what you'll see is that in this survey, Koreans self-identify as our most Republican group in this survey. Yet, on the immigration issue, as they're watching, the majority of Koreans are saying that these raids are racial targeting, higher than any other AAPI ethnic group. So people are watching the administration's actions and what they're doing on people who look like us, right? People who showed up to their jobs on a Tuesday and were victims of the largest workplace raid yet. And I would point out that immigration also, again, going back to the economy, very much lands in the economy column also, right? The largest, an astronomical increase in H-1B visas, right? Which disproportionately affects many in our community. Revoking visas, an increase in student visas, and just mass confusion, period, about how countries are getting shut down, economic anxiety, right? Like there's confusion, there's fear, and there's certainly also just an increase in costs. So we just wanted to point that out as we look to connect the dots here. And again, look for what's in this survey on how we engage within our community organizing and education on connecting those dots to participating in November.
Just one more slide on immigration. This is kind of the kind of positions on legal immigration pathways. And, I think one kind of takeaway here is kind of the same that we saw in other issues, is just like those strongly agree numbers, very high for the critics of the administration and very low for the administration's position, particularly low here, I think, compared to some of the other ones. Current immigration policies are appropriate, got 4% strongly agreeing. So even kind of the base there is like having some doubts. But the other thing I want to point out, we need secure borders, but also accessible legal pathways. This was 81% overall, very high, but less surprising to me. But again, kind of the calling out of racism. Trump is systematically closing door to Asian families, attacking birthright citizenship, revoking visas. 67% agreed, including 46 strongly. And then the message being sent is that America is only for the white and wealthy. 67% agree, 47% strongly. And you can see that kind of for younger folks, the agree numbers are even higher. So again, kind of the willingness to call out racism is just kind of much higher here. So we asked this question about kind of what makes it hard for you to vote. I will just kind of, give the context here is that typically when you ask about voting in surveys of voters, everybody says, oh, I vote all the time. It's no problem. Don't worry about it. Here we have half of the voters saying, oh, yeah, no, I can point the finger at something. There are some things that are hard. So this is just compared to kind of any other population, much higher identification of barriers to voting. The work schedule, we often see that's, a version of the like, I don't have time. But all these other ones, I don't feel informed, the childcare responsibilities, transportation issues, lack of early voting options. The idea that folks are willing to name these things, I think, does point to the degree to which there are there's just kind of more structural barriers for some of these voters. If you look at it by age, it's even greater. Only 35% of young voters say that it's easy to vote. Only 38% of lower income voters say it's easy to vote. So we have kind of some real identification of genuine barriers to voting. Okay, just kind of on trust and information before Carrie closes us out. We have kind of less party loyalty amongst AAPI voters across the board. You can see kind of 20% strong Democrats, 8% strong Republicans. So it's about 72% who are kind of either weak partisans or nonpartisan. That includes what you kind of have in the middle here, which is 42% who call themselves independents the first time we asked. Then we asked kind of the independents, well, do you lean a little bit more Democrat, a little bit more Republican? And you can see they are willing to say that they lean a little bit. But even this kind of 18% number is about double what we see in kind of the overall population these days. Like generally speaking, our electorate is just extremely partisan. It's like 45, 45, 10. And here you can see that there's kind of much less partisan loyalty. And that is especially true for lower income folks, especially true for younger folks. But just kind of that is broadly true for AAPI voters. And then when we ask about ideology, it is even more the case. 55% call themselves moderates, the kind of, very liberal, very conservatives that like largely dominate our political discourse, just kind of very underrepresented in AAPI voters overall. So I think this is kind of a helpful thing for us to think about. There's just less kind of institutional, ideological loyalty amongst AAPI voters generally kind of across ethnicity compared to other parts of the electorate. And some of that, I think, is because neither party is really doing their jobs. So this is kind of from a previous survey in July of 2024. Have you been contacted by the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, or community organizations? And you can see that the majority say, oh, I haven't heard anything from them. 55, 62, 59%. And it should not be the case that community organizations are having as much reach as the major political parties, but that is what we're seeing, that, some of the folks on this call, that you are doing as much as the entirety of the Democratic and Republican Party infrastructure. And when you look at it by age, it is particularly bad for older folks. So some of this is likely due to language, but when you look at seniors, only 41% had heard from the Democratic Party, even lower for Republican Party. So the vast majority of seniors are saying, yeah, I don't hear from either political party. When we ask folks kind of what influences them, what are they looking for from political candidates? Okay, if the Democratic Party does reach out to you, what do you want to hear? and we gave them kind of top three. And again, you can kind of see this falls into tiers. So the top tier, overwhelming track record of real results, not just promises, and addressing the issues that I care about: economy, healthcare, safety. So those two, kind of overwhelmingly the top tier. In the second tier, character and integrity, and standing up to corporations and special interests. So those things together really are the bulk of what folks are looking for. What they are looking for much less is to be specifically catered to. So they understand and prioritize my community specific concerns, their party affiliation, they share my cultural background or identity. That is not what folks are looking for. They're looking for a record that you're talking about my issues, that you seem like somebody I can trust, and that you're going to stand up to corporations, but less so that you share my cultural background or my party, or even are saying that you're going to kind of connect with my community specific issues. Carrie, you want to close us out?
Yeah, just a couple things when I look at the data that stand out, right? Nearly 3 in 4 AAPI voters say voting is a civic duty, not a personal choice, but it's actually a duty. And as you pointed out, Seiji, and I've seen these surveys in the past, and the numbers are really quite similar, whether by state, whether you're looking at, 24 or 22. So voters are saying it's a civic duty, and the same communities, in most cases, more than half, have never had any meaningful, rememberable contact from either political party. And let's be real, like I've sat in a lot of tables over the years, I've seen the budgets too, and I would say it tracks. This isn't an apathy problem. This is an invisibility problem. And it's a problem that groups like APIAVote and so many of the C3 organizations are just so uniquely and so well positioned to solve. Particularly where in the other slide we saw that the party loyalty numbers, right? And we're increasingly seeing other kinds of indicators that are telling us AAPI voters don't want to be engaged in a partisan way. They want to be engaged on these issues. And as we saw in this survey here, the API voters know what's happening. 67% named it on how they see things. America is only for the white and wealthy. That's the message they're getting from where they sit today and all the surround sound that's happening in the environment. Yet they're still saying that 3 in 4 that voting is a civic duty. They need us right now to fill the gaps, right? Like again, I would just want to go back to the letter, not in, and we all, so many of us, we are specialists and we talk about policies and we know all the acronyms and the jargon, but I go back to the letter and to the importance of trusted messengers, right? And how we frame the issues, and how we are uniquely not only positioned, but probably are the groups to be counting on to go underneath the bigger economic frame to those other organizing opportunities that talk about what's happening with tariffs in our communities, or how immigration is showing up and enforcement mechanisms in a different way. If we're not doing that, no one else will. But what they will do, and we see it election after election, and we're seeing it all now, and it's only going to increase, is that some will continue to fill the space with a sense of fear and a sense of scarcity. And if we aren't there to organize and to message in a different way, those lenses will be the viewpoint that many of the voters in our community will see the policy decisions, and may or may not hold the public officials accountable in the way that we should be. So I think the survey was just a really great indicator of where to dig in, but the message isn't the whole strategy. The relationship and those trusted relationships, those trusted platforms and leaders, and the way that we talk about it, even more so. And we're gonna distribute the survey, or Christine, or it'll be up on the website, or
Yes, I'll
Okay.
go ahead and provide information at the end.
Great. I'll turn it over to you.
Great, wonderful. Thank you, Carrie, and thank you, Seiji, for analyzing and digging into the data and making us understand what are the trends. As noted, this was conducted back in November. But right now, I would like to bring on two of our partners from New Jersey as well as Minnesota. We have Amber Reed, who's the co-executive director of AAPI New Jersey, who did lots of activations, which you will go ahead and briefly talk about this past November. And then also Linda Herr, which is the executive director of Future of Us from Minnesota. So Amber, why don't we go ahead and get started with you? And then we'll go ahead and turn it over to Linda.
Sure. Thanks, Christine. Yeah, shout out to my Jersey folks in the house. I see you all. Thanks for being here. And thanks for this opportunity, API vote. So New Jersey is one of two states with off-year gubernatorial elections. So we elected a new governor in 2025. Usually our state alternates between parties. No party has held on for more than 8 years and decades. So it was widely expected to be a very close race. As it happens, we ended up electing Governor Mikey Sherrill, the Democratic candidate, by 14 points. That compares to a 6-point win for Harris in New Jersey in 2024. API New Jersey was part of a multiracial effort called the Million Voters Project with Black and Latino-led organizations trying to reach out to low propensity voters. We focused on heavily AAPI areas for people who know Jersey, Bergen County, Middlesex County, Hudson County. And we saw, the exact same things that I think we see reflected in this national survey with cost of living and affordability being very much top of mind. We exit poll outside of polling sites every primary and general election. And I remember in 2024 showing up thinking that in an area like Edison, New Jersey, which is about 50% South Asian American, we would see so much excitement for the first, South Asian American presidential candidate, and just having a very strange energy there, with just seeing survey after survey coming back with, Trump, people indicating they voted for Trump. It was very different this time. So in 24, Harris won in Edison, according to our polling, by only, I think she had 53%. But this past year, the margin was more like 80% for the Democratic versus Republican candidate. So we definitely saw just a huge shift to the left in New Jersey, and not just among Asian American voters, but among Black and Latino voters as well. It was really this sort of multiracial coalition of Black voters voting 94%, Asians 82%, Latino voters 68% for the Democratic candidate that really pushed this governor into office. So I'll pause there. We can go into more about what we heard from voters at the doors, but very interesting trends in this state. And we also recently had another special election to fill the congressional seat that Cheryl left. And there, surprisingly, in a fairly moderate district that had been flipped by Cheryl herself, we saw the most progressive candidate come out of that field to win the primary.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Linda. It's great to be on here with you all. So in Minnesota, we have over 300,000 API Minnesotans, and about half of that are eligible voters. We make up 5% of the electorate here in Minnesota, and we are critical swing votes. We also have about 25 plus majority Hmong elected officials across the state legislature, city council, school boards, and elected our first Hmong woman mayor in this past election. And so really excited for our elected officials. But as our organization, we are nonpartisan, and we've been focusing in terms of a lot of voter education, We've been doing that for the last 10 years. One of the key things that when I became executive director was to break the perpetual engagement from political parties. If you do work on campaigns, right, it's a lot of short-term engagement with specifically in our Asian communities here. And my mission was to make sure that we continue to expand on the voter civic engagement axis, continue to create democracy, making it more accessible for our Minnesota Asian voters here. And so we expanded from your typical 3 months, like get out the vote effort to engaging with our voters since April. And so last year we did dial in over like 3,000 calls, and we have like a 10% rate when we do make those calls. And we had talked to about 300 voters between 18 to 35. That's our targeted age range. Between Hennepin and Ramsey County. And that's where majority of our Asian voters do reside in the metro area here. We did find out that a good amount of our base, they do rely on social media and online to get their news around politics. Traditional media is secondary. And that online messaging is really critical too, to engage with informing our base. There are a strong negative sentiment towards the federal government, which I think in the slide had touched some key parts on, such as the top concern is on economy, tariffs, tax, as well as government incompetence and corruption. And that's also at the top of their concerns. And misuse of power and civil rights concerns are that they do have. In terms of local government, I think we definitely need to do better on, which is that most of our folks are not as in tune with local governments as they are with federal government related information. And some of the responses indicates that they have low awareness or disengagement. And, again, I think based on the deck, right, like political parties may not be truly engaging with our communities at a more educational nuance as we would as a nonprofit. And yeah, and I'm just gonna stop there so I allow for like more conversations as well.
Great, wonderful. Thank you, Amber. Thank you, Linda, for some of the reactions and insights of what's happening on the ground. As we go ahead and bring back Carrie and Seiji for part of this Q&A conversation and spotlight them, I do have one question from an attendee. They said, I often feel isolated as a proactive and young Southeast Asian American because many Asian American Gen Zs seem to not care about voting. I've tried talking and educating peers around me. What types of practice or advice would you give? I figure maybe Amber and Linda, maybe one of you guys could speak about that.
I can chime in. Yeah, I think, we've came out of the pandemic, like a lot has happened. There's a lot of political fatigue. Like Minnesota, we've been sort of the center stage, right, with the civil unrest, with the Operation Metro Surge. And so our team, like we've been thinking a lot of like, how do we create space to engage with young people again? And so we did like the survey last year so you could better inform us. I would say that it will be important to meet people where they're at in terms of like creating more spaces that encourages people to talk about their experiences in processing and adding, some joy and fun into it. I think at this point, at least what we learned is that people don't really want to be, pushed with so many political information because they are already overwhelmed, especially young people, most of like spend a lot of time online, right, scrolling and feeling overwhelmed. So it'll be important to create space to have a balance and encourage people to talk and process.
Great. Ben from Washington, D.C. is asking, do we know how these opinions compare to the general population? Are there instances where API public opinion significantly deviates from that of the general population?
Yeah, I mean, I think of the stuff that we covered here, tariffs, I think, is one example where there's just like much more sensitivity, personal experience, understanding of the costs of tariffs. I think immigration is another one where it's not that the attitudes are totally different, but just the kind of personal impact and connection to it is much higher. And so I think there's much more kind of criticism there. kind of, being targeted, feeling unsafe because of feeling personally targeted or fear of hate crimes is another one that, there's different versions of in different communities, but I think for API voters, it's a particular type of concern. Um, and then I think, the kind of impact of healthcare on multiple generations is like more of a broad concern for API voters than it is in particular for white voters who are kind of more focused on their own healthcare. So those are a few. I mean, I think the kind of broad strokes of some of these are like fairly similar, like the kind of everybody's concerned about a lot of this stuff right now. The focus on cost of living is pretty pervasive, but those are a few that do kind of stand out as being different for API voters in particular.
Christine, I would add one other area, and Sadie, I don't know if you want to say anything else about this, but just because I think you're going to continue to see ads, like political ads around this. Another area where we saw in 24 and in this survey, where API voters are different is like democracy and voting rights. You're seeing like all voters being more like there's usually somewhere between a 15 to 30 point gap where that lands in AAPI communities.
Great. Carlos says, thanks so much for this excellent webinar. Would love to know what our panelists think are the greatest challenges to API civic engagement going into November. I'm sure there's lots of thoughts on that.
I mean, I'll just throw one out, which is just like it is a similar problem for everybody, but nobody trusts any information. I mean, just like the information ecosystem is really dark right now. And I think that's particularly true for folks who do not have, who are newer to this country, who do not have kind of like a history of voting, a history of like places that they can go for trustworthy information. On the encouraging side, I think that young voters in particular have gotten much better at navigating that. And I think we are seeing kind of some growth in engagement. But yeah, just to start us.
Amber, do you have any thoughts?
I think Asian Americans often, I've noticed, like to feel really confident that they're going to do something well and they're going to do it right. And there can be a lot of barriers to voting, and people can also be afraid of like making the wrong decision at the ballot box because they don't know enough, right? So the more we can help get people the resources they need to feel confident in voting, I feel like the sort of story is telling itself right now. So we are focusing a little more, I think, on just the process, right? Like overcoming the hurdle of registration and understanding voting dates and understanding how to do a mail-in ballot properly. I think the more you can give people that kind of information so they feel confident, the more likely they are to show up.
And Linda, since you're in Minnesota and we know what just happened in Minnesota, and since then there's been discussions about ICE at the polls. Have there been any thoughts among your peers or what you've observed in terms of conversation as you guys are, trying to recover from that experience?
Yes, I'll answer. I echo what everyone said, and I'll answer that question as well as I do see a couple of the questions that are similar to, right, from the chat. I think that with Operation Metro Surge, it has really compelled people to come out and help community, creating neighborhood groups. There definitely are a lot more like Hmong and Asian folks who are like, how do I get involved? What I do? And that's a critical, important moment for like our organization and other partners to harness that energy. So we have like a benefit that's coming up this Saturday that allows people to, ease in, right, to get involved and in a way that they feel comfortable. And we've a lot of our partners too, we've been focusing on like developing constitutional observers. So COPAL and Immigrant Defense Network, our partner has done such a great job to train like over 30,000 constitutional observers in the last several months. And there are strategies where how do we get some of those constitutional observers to get trained on election protection or partake in some of those efforts? But I think truly a lot of our communities are still dependent on like elected officials and governments to come up to step up and speak and provide like guidance and assurance so that they feel a lot safer. So for example, with schools, right, a lot of the impacted communities are like, well, we don't know if it's safer should our children return back to school or not? And it's really up to like the schools, right? The school leaders to make sure that everything's safe and are able to communicate, provide, language access so that the parents and families do feel safe. Our school just returned back to in-person school recently. In terms of Chongli Scat, for me, it's been really quiet in social media and in our community up until Chongli Scat. But because Minnesota, we've been strategic in training constitutional observers to be able to document the lawlessness and all the things that we knew that was going to happen with ICE, right, in our city and state. And so when folks did see Chongli Scat, that's where Hmong folks who were maybe on the fence or were either on the right or like unsure on the left, they did come and be like, oh, I don't want to be racially profiled. And so I've seen and talked to folks who have shifted to saying like, I don't trust and I don't trust this immigration tactics, right? Or ICE tactic. And so people are taking a stance. And with Chongli Scat, it was so pivotal for the Hmong community. And many people have then since broke silence and started to speak up.
Right. Michael is asking, what successful tactic strategies do our panel recommend for getting more buy-in from political organizations to better engage API voters, especially at state and local levels?
Great question.
I mean, I think one thing is the numbers are really in. People look so often at like the percentage where it's 2% in safety, and have had these conversations a lot, or 4%. But in contested races, they're won on the margins every single election by less than 1%. And so, showing that how fast we are growing, how young the community is, how little is actually being invested so far, and that their population, be it 2% or 7%, still exceeds the margin of what we are winning or losing by in these contested races. And I think we're also seeing trends of Asian American voters identifying more independent, moderate, or no party. And that's another selling point that I think is important for people to understand.
Yeah, I think one way of thinking about it is that even in races or geographies where APIs are a small proportion of overall voters, they're often a much higher proportion of persuadable voters, just because there aren't that many persuadable voters left. So kind of communities that have disproportionate numbers of persuadable voters, I think, do become kind of electorally important.
Two more questions. I'm going to sneak in here. How are you addressing the spread of voting misinformation on Chinese language platforms like WeChat, particularly for limited English proficient Chinese American voters? Maybe Amber?
Yeah, well, Christine, your team does a lot of really great work around inoculation against this kind of misinformation and disinformation. I think we need to get on these platforms more, and I think we need to make more videos, right? All of our aunties are sending videos to each other on WeChat and Kakao Talk, right? And that's how they're getting their information. So we need to get there too and get out ahead of some of these things rather than trying to clean up after.
And one last question. Have philanthropic institutions shown increased interest in investing in API civic engagement as we gear up for the elections?
Not
I
as
want
much
to
as
toss
they
that to Amber.
should.
No time like the present.
Amber, Linda?
I would say it might depend. For sure, some of our one of our multi-year ranter last year had made strategic decision to like cut off the multi-year contract. They did come back to us this year and increase our grant and would like to partner with us. I think locally, a lot of our foundations still focus on rapid response. And so it's going to be important for us as, people in the nonprofit EDs or development directors or grant writers to be setting meetings and talking to foundations and making our cases. And partnering with our partners, right, who are focused on democracy and election work to like make that case. I think people are still kind of like trying to figure out how do we do aftercare, but we do know that we don't have, a lot of time. So the conversation is now. So we have to actually go and talk to folks if they're not coming to us.
Great. I want to be respectful of everyone's times, but I do want to just try to answer a few things. We will provide contact information. I know some folks want to follow ups, especially with Amber and Linda, in terms of activations. API Vote will be providing additional webinars, so stay tuned, especially as we provide a recap in terms of challenges that we're seeing in terms of voting rights and protecting our safety as we head into this election cycle. I also want to flag for everyone that there is an action alert right now that API Vote has pushed out around the SAVE Act in terms of calling your senators this week and next week. And just in general, we encourage you to continue to follow API Vote as we continue to provide you with updates and actions that need to be taken in the coming months. But overall, I want to thank you everyone for joining us today, and many thanks to our speakers and partners for participating and sharing their insights. I know a lot of folks were asking more for like geographic breakdowns and other oversamples for other ethnic communities. This is where I need a plea to all of you. Please connect us up with funders. Please make a donation. We are looking to release our Asian American voter survey and to actually implement that for this summer. So that way we have deeper dive insights and oversamples. But currently, the philanthropy world is quite challenging for the nonprofits, especially in the AAPI community. So whatever help, if you really would like to see pre-election surveys, post-election surveys, that means we really need the resources to be able to do that. As you can see, the stakes are high, and before the midterm elections, we are planning to engage 1.9 million AAPI voters across 7 battleground states, 38 congressional districts, and 31 states nationwide with the work of our partners. That means investments are needed. That goal is ambitious by design. It reflects the scale and urgency of our challenge. So we look forward to partnering with you and your networks to make it happen. So thank you everyone for joining us, and have a good day.